Good morning.
Good morning.
I like that little leaning in thing.
You like to put your big face in the camera?
Yeah.
I'm scared.
Ruth, part 2.
Yes.
We apologize again. We skipped the day yesterday. It's really busy. It's been an interesting day today.
Yes, it has.
But we're ending our evening with talking about Ruth 2. If you don't know what we're talking about, please go back a couple videos in our channel so you can kind of get caught up to speed, because this is an amazing, powerful story. And because it's so powerful, we just want to get right into it.
Yep.
So, like I said, pause here if you haven't heard part 1, because I don't want to have to re-explain it all.
Yep.
So finally, as Naomi and Ruth go
Let
back,
them know where we're starting, though. We're on Ruth
chapter 2.
chapter 2.
Yeah. And so Naomi is a widow and Ruth is a widow, and they go back to Israel. And Ruth is a Moabite woman. She's not even Hebrew. And they go back, and then it brings in a character, a person named Boaz. It's an interesting man because it says in the first verse there was a relative of Naomi's husband. So Naomi, it says a relative of Naomi's husband, a man of great wealth, of the family of Elimelech. His name was Boaz. So this man was a relative of Naomi, well, related to her late husband. And in verse 2, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but just to set the stage here. It says, so Ruth, the Moabitess, he even names her after the nation of Moab, which is not a good thing, actually, if you go back to the first video. So Ruth, the Moabitess, said to Naomi, please let me go to the field and glean heads of grain, after him in whose sight I may find favor. And she said to her, go, my daughter. I mean, they were basically beggars. They were homeless. They had nothing. They had no money. And they said that she even asked permission from her mother-in-law. Let me go to the field and basically pick up what the workers leave behind.
Yeah.
You know, I grew up, remember the first time you met me, the tomatoes? You know, I grew up around tomato fields. And every time when I was young, when the tractors would come and pick up all the tomatoes, as kids, they would always leave tomatoes behind. And I ate so many tomatoes growing up. I would actually carry salt in my pocket.
Oh, really?
Because when we would go out riding our bikes out in the country, we got hungry, man, we'd just clean the dust of tomato off on our shirt and just eat it with some salt. It was good.
Nice.
So basically I was gleaning what the workers were dropping. So Ruth is like, you know, let me go to the fields and collect some of the grain that falls. That way I can make bread. That way we could eat. And so she asks, you know, she goes, okay, go ahead. And I love how she says, you know, let me go and maybe I'll find favor. She to me, without realizing, this Moab woman that didn't know God was speaking in faith already.
I know.
She's like, just let me go. In other words, I'm going to go and find out how I can get some grain and make bread. Let me go where I'm going to find some favor on me. You know, so she goes. And in verse 3, it says, then she left and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. So people are picking the grain and the little tiny bits that they left behind, she's picking it up like a beggar. You know, and she happened to come to the field belonging to Boaz, this rich relative of Elimelech. And So it says that, you know, Boaz, he shows up to Bethlehem. And I imagine he's looking at his workers, looking at everybody. And he's like, hey, who's that young woman over there? Who is that? You know, and one of the servants who was in charge of the reapers, maybe like a foreman, he says, oh, it's the young Moabite woman. It's like she can't take this old reputation off of her.
Yeah.
How many of you in your life can't take your old reputation off of you?
Yeah.
They call you by what you were. How many times do people call me Sir Dino from my rap name?
Oh my God. Just today.
Today.
We went to go have dinner and, you know, somebody came up and, you know, hey, you know, Sir Dino, and, you know, and people always wanting to take pictures or whatever or something, you know, and
Well, they call me by my old name.
yeah, they do. They call you by your old name, even knowing that you know your life has changed.
I've
they
had
still
people
do.
call me Pastor Dino.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny.
Yeah.
So,
But I laugh when you tell them, no, you know, he's dead, and they look at you like, what? Like, you know, like really, like what? You know, like thinking, no, but you look like him. You know, they're really actually thinking when you tell them that.
yeah.
You know, it's awesome though.
I tell people Sir Dino died when I said he drowned. They're like, really? I said, yeah, when he got baptized. I left that old person behind in those waters. So then he's like, who is this woman, you know? And this is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. Like, in case you didn't hear, I said she was a Moabite woman. Yeah, she came from Moab.
Yeah.
And again, if you don't understand the significance of that, watch the first video. So it goes, and then he goes on explaining, and she said, please let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves. So she came and has continued from morning until now, though she rested a little bit. So he gave her the whole rundown.
Yeah.
He's just like, hey, who's this young woman? Where she was from and what she was doing. And she asked, could I please glean? You know, and what's interesting here is what happens. He says, he tells them this. Where's it at? Where am I at? Verse 8. Then Boaz said, so he goes up to her and speaks to her. This is the boss. This is like the CEO. Mm-hmm. And he walks up to this young woman, this Moabite woman from Moab. And he walks up to her, to Ruth, and he says, you will listen, my daughter, will you not? Do not go glean in another field. I love that. He's like, listen, don't go finding grain in other fields. Don't do that. He goes, don't leave from here, but stay close by my young women. I love the fact that he doesn't even know her. She's a foreigner.
Yeah.
But he's worried about her safety. And he says, don't go to these other fields, these other people, because they could treat you bad because you're from Moab. Stay close to the women here. You know, just stay here. Glean on my fields. Work on my fields. Pick the leftovers.
Well,
on my fields.
He also instructed.
Well, that's what we're going to get to right now.
But here's what I loved. I love the fact that Boaz, you can tell that Boaz was an amazing CEO, an amazing boss, an amazing person because of the fact that, you know, you have all these harvesters and everything, but you take notice when there's a new harvester there.
Yeah.
Or when there's
he knew his workers.
There's a new person that's gleaning off of your field that you take notice of that. And that tells a lot. Just like, I don't, when you go into somewhere and you have a place, a location that's so big, it's hard. It's kind of hard because you don't get a chance to get to know everyone, you know?
Yeah.
But when you have somewhere where it's smaller and you're able to fellowship and you're able to just, get to know people by their name and everything, there's just so much more of a closeness, and you can tell that that's what he had here because he knew people. He knew people. It's like he knew who was out in his field, and that's what really stood out to me when I remember when I had read this. I said, "That's a good person for him to know."
Yeah. And then he lets her in on something. I don't want to read the whole thing, but basically he lets her know. He goes, listen, he goes, I don't want you to go to other fields. I want you to stay here, stay with the women. He goes, didn't you know that I told these young men not to touch you? You know it. So he was a man of integrity. He was a man of respect. He had principles.
Yeah.
To the point where he said, listen, I know she's from Moab. I know she's a foreigner. I get that. But you know what? I command you, do not touch her. So that shows us that he had authority.
Yeah.
And he basically told those guys, hey, you better not do nothing crazy. And I like that too. And he tells her, listen, and if you get thirsty, Ruth, go ahead and drink. We have water here.
Yeah, but drink water from the buckets that the servants have filled. Not go get your own water, but that the servants have filled. He's already giving her value.
Yeah.
He's already speaking value into her and showing her that she is of value to him. Yeah. He already showed that and bestowed that upon her. And that was just beautiful.
Well, we're going to explain why, though. It explains why in a bit. But then she falls on her face. And she's like, I don't understand. Why are you treating me so good? Why have I found favor in your sight? Like, she's like, because she knows she's a foreigner. She knows how Israel feels about Moab. And she falls to her face. And it's like, man, I'm just a foreigner. And Boaz answered her. He gives her an answer, and he goes, it has been fully reported to me. See, that's what, like you said, he's an amazing CEO. He was on top of his game.
Yeah.
He knew everything that was going on. Yeah. He had an amazing peripheral vision of just everything that was happening. And he says, it's been fully reported to me that everything you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, and how you left your father and your mother in the land of your birth, and you came to a people who don't even know you. So he honored that.
Yeah.
He's like, he knows. I believe that Ruth was a beautiful woman. And he's like, beautiful young widow. She could have stayed back in Moab and easily married again. And instead you followed your mother-in-law to live basically as a beggar.
Yeah.
And I think he honored that. And he liked that, he saw honor in that, I mean. And then he tells her, the Lord repay your work in full reward be given to you by the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge.
Yeah.
So now we know, not only is he an amazing CEO, he's a believer.
Yeah.
He believes in God. And he literally believes that God has carried her under God's wing because of her honoring her mother-in-law. I think that speaks volumes to him. He's obviously a man of integrity. He's obviously a man of honor. So he sees an honorable woman, regardless if she's a beggar, regardless if she's homeless, he sees honor in her. He sees something in her.
Yeah.
So then she's happy, she's excited, and after she gleans and gets enough to make bread, she runs home to Naomi. And she runs back to her, and basically Naomi's like, how'd you get all this grain? Like, Naomi is an older woman, she knows how much is left behind in the field. And she's probably like, how did you get all this grain? How did you do this? What happened? And she explains to her and explains who Boaz is and all these things, and just basically runs it down to her. And Naomi, remember, she was bitter. Remember, she saw no hope. All of a sudden, boom, the light turns on. Because Boaz is a relative. And in Hebrew custom, that if her husband dies without giving her a son, the next of kin marries her in order to have children so the generation doesn't die.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I think Naomi realizes this, and I believe she finally came out of her bitterness, came out of her hardship, because
And saw hope.
yeah, she saw hope. I believe that Naomi said, oh my God, like, guys, have you ever been in a position where everything seems insane and all of a sudden something amazing happens and you're like, this was God. God set this up all along, and all of a sudden you see what God already saw. There's times where we've been in a situation and God steps in, and the whole time I'm like, what was I worried about?
I know.
And God was like, yeah, what were you worried about? I was setting things up for you before you even got here. I was setting up your Saturday while it was still your Thursday. I was setting up your 2020 while you're worried about 2019. And so what is awesome is that eventually Boaz asked Ruth to marry him. And I love the fact that he doesn't do it in the unders. He doesn't underhandedly do it. He goes to the main gates of the city, which in our day would be the city hall, or where all the important people of the city gather. He went to the heads of the city. This is a guy that is Jewish, that people don't like Moab.
Yeah.
But he was so, I believe, authoritative. He was a rich, wealthy man.
Well respected.
Well respected. And he could have thrown his whole reputation to say, you know what? I'm here to declare that Ruth was married to my relative. I'm the next of kin. I'm going to marry her. They could have rejected him because she was from Moab.
Yeah.
Guys, God laid his reputation down for you and I, knowing where we came out of. It's like God goes into the heavens, because the Bible says that do not be ashamed of the Lord, and if you won't earn ashamed of him, he won't be ashamed of you when he comes into heaven, that he declares that you're his. So in a way, it's a shadow of Christ, because Boaz went to the gates of the city to tell the most important people, I'm taking this woman, even though she's a foreigner, even though she doesn't know our God, I'm going to bring her in. And isn't that literally what Jesus did?
Yeah.
That he comes into the heavenly places and he declares that we belong to him, even though we're from a foreign land, even though we're from something.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. And he says, no, they're mine. He's mine. She's mine.
Yeah.
I declare them. And what I love the fact is that here she was, like a beggar, gleaning off of a field that was about to be her inheritance.
I know, right?
The fields she worked in, she became the owner.
Yeah.
The servants that helped her became her servants. And little did she know. A lot of times, guys, those of you that are watching, you are living or operating in something that God is going to just hand to you. He's going to drop it on your lap. And I don't mean just in financial world. That is just a small part of it. But you could be literally eating the crumbs of something that the table is going to belong to you.
It's already God's plan.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's already been God's plan, and we sometimes don't even realize it. We're like barely touching the surface of certain things, and we're kind of thinking that it's a hindrance or it's a burden or something, but not realizing that it's God just touching the surface of what he has for us or what's to come. And the best is yet to come. is what he's telling us.
Yeah.
To stand still. Sometimes he just wants us to stand still long enough so that it can happen. And a lot of the times we get so fidgety and we just want to start moving around, and we don't stand still long enough to allow him to do what he needs to do in our lives.
Yeah.
You know, and we're constantly on the move, and you know, it's like, okay, God, just surrender, and here I am. Let me stand still so you can do what you got to do.
Now, this is the best part of the story. This is a beautiful story, but I haven't even said, to me, the most significant part is that Boaz marries Ruth. Everything, remember, he's wealthy. He's probably the wealthiest person in all of Bethlehem.
Yeah.
And a foreign woman with foreign gods comes in. What does she tell Naomi in the beginning? She goes, I will follow your God.
Yeah.
I will go where you go. And the God you serve will become my God that I serve.
Die where you die. Yeah.
And I will die where you die. And she marries Boaz. Now, this is the part that's amazing, right? She marries Boaz, and they have a son. And that son's name, I want to make sure I get it right here. Give me 1 second here. Named,
Is it Jacob?
no. Obed.
Oh, Obed, yes.
Yeah.
Mine from there.
So they had a son named Obed, right? And this is, there's a couple parts. I haven't got to the good part yet. But remember Naomi? Remember she said, call me bitter? Call me Mara because I'm bitter. It says here that all of a sudden Ruth marries Boaz and they have a son, and then all the women, remember the women that probably looked down on her because she abandoned Israel, because she went to Moab. But here it says all of a sudden she says, then the women said to Naomi in verse 14, verse 4, blessed be the Lord who has not left you this day without a close relative, and may his name be famous in Israel. So Naomi, who was in shame, who was in doubt, who was in self, what's the word I use? Condemnation. Now everything changes. She literally said, call me Mara, call me bitter. And now all the women are praising her. And says, blessed be the Lord who has not left you.
Yeah.
Because remember in the beginning, she says, God's left me.
Yeah.
You know, and it goes, and may he be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you, who is better to you than 7 sons, has borne him. And this is crazy. Then Naomi this old woman, Naomi took the child and laid him on her bosom, and she became a nurse to him. Do you understand what that's saying? She began to nurse.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So anyways, I'm not even to the best part, guys. This is amazing. So they have a son. They name him Obed. Obed grows up and has a son named Jesse. Yeah. Jesse has sons, and one of Jesse's sons, the youngest, is David. David that killed Goliath. David who became king of Israel. Yeah. David who God promised that out of his lineage would come the Messiah. Mm-hmm. This is what I'm saying. Ruth from Moab, from a foreign land that didn't know God, is the great, 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 great grandfather of Jesus Christ. Out of her lineage, grandmother. Out of her lineage,
get it right.
Out of her lineage came Jesus.
Yeah.
This woman who said, "There's nothing, I have nothing," to Ruth, who says, "I'll leave everything," to having Obed, to having Jesse, to having David, and later on, Jesus.
Yeah.
The very lineage of the King of all kings of Israel. Out of a woman that served a different God, God brought greatness.
Yeah.
So if God can do that, I don't care what you came out of. God doesn't care what you came out of. Nothing can disqualify you from the
right.
great things of God. Don't for a second think that because you came out of witchcraft, because you came out of gangs, because you came out of addiction, because maybe you were born out of a rape.
Or a victim of abuse.
Yeah.
Or just of depression.
Or maybe
suicide.
what
anything.
or you grew up, maybe your parents abandoned you, or your mom abandoned you, your dad abandoned you. Maybe you grew up in an orphanage and you think like, man, what am I? God can't use me. And God's like, no, if I could use Ruth, matter of fact, Jesus says, I came from the lineage of Ruth.
That's right.
What makes you think that there is not greatness in your lineage? You might feel like you're picking up crumbs off the table. Well, you know what? Ruth picked up crumbs off the field, not realizing that the field was about to be hers.
Do you know you can actually make a cake out of crumbs?
Crumb cake?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You actually can. If you got enough crumbs, you can actually make something out of it.
Yeah. So that's pretty much for Ruth. It's a beautiful story. Please read it. There's a lot of things I left out because you can't say the whole thing, but it's actually only 4 chapters.
Yeah, it's not long.
You can sit and read it within an hour.
Yeah.
Or less. It's a beautiful, beautiful story. But as you read it, guys, if you're new to the Bible, a lot of things in the Old Testament are like shadows of what Jesus is to the church. So imagine ourselves being Ruth, and imagine Boaz being Jesus. And you will start to understand the beauty of this story. So have a great morning, guys. God bless you.
Yes.
We'll see you again tomorrow morning, and just have an amazing, blessed day. Jesus loves you, and He hasn't abandoned you.
Yes.
He will
we
never.
missed you yesterday.
Yeah, and He will never abandon you. He says so. He says, "I will never leave you, nor forsake you." So, all right, guys. God bless you.
Bless you guys. Bye.